Have you ever wished that you could see into the future? What do you think the benefits might be if you could see into the future?
Avoid the mistakes.
Avoid the mistakes. All right.
Prepared for heartaches.
Preparing for heartaches. Yeah.
Sure. Not gonna happen.
Okay.
Investments.
Investments. Oh, investments. Yeah. So I always wanted to. Okay, what would be some of the drawbacks? Let's look at it from the other side for a moment. What would be some of the drawbacks if we could see into the future? What? Terrifying. Ooh, yes.
Never leaving the house.
Never leaving the house.
The destruction of the world.
Oh, the destruction of the world. Wow. Okay.
Afraid of making the mistakes.
Afraid of making mistakes.
Afraid to take chances.
Okay.
Not enjoying the now because you know what's coming.
Okay. Not enjoying the now because you would know what's already coming. Okay, so here's the hard question. I mean, if you could actually acquire the ability to see your entire future in a glance, would you even want to?
No.
Thank you. I was hoping that would be universal. You see, when it comes to looking into the future, we can make our plans, we can dream our dreams, but the reality is we're not even guaranteed tomorrow. Now, some people might find that a little bit discouraging or depressing. But what I think it does is it teaches us to trust in God even more in that moment by moment, day to day relationship that we have with Him. Now, speaking of trust, raise your hand if you've ever been on a trust walk before. A few of you, about a half dozen or so here. Now, I don't know how they do those around here, but I want to tell you how we did them in our years of youth ministry. We would divide all the kids up into two teams. And one at a time, they would compete against each other. We would kind of have this prearranged obstacle course, which usually meant chairs and tables and, different things on the floor. We would blindfold each student, one at a time, one from each team. They would compete against each other. And then we would spin them around several times to disorient them so they had no idea which way they were facing before they started. And then the rest of their teammates would shout out directions to them which way to go to avoid the obstacles to get across the finish line, the quickest. But teenagers, being teenagers, there were always those few who would be shouting out wrong directions to the opposing team. Because they thought there was nothing funnier than to see somebody go crashing into a wall or tripping over a chair or running into a table or all those wonderful things that kids love to do. I mean, what was fun about it was for us leaders, because we're kind of looking at it from the sidelines, laughing our heads off usually. But when there are a couple dozen different voices yelling at you, telling you where to go, it can be paralyzing. Every step that those young people would take was always very cautious, very tentative. You never saw somebody just charge ahead thinking that I'm going to be the first one across the finish line. There were usually one or two guys, and normally those were the ones that tripped right over a table or a chair or whatever and wound up on the floor. But mostly, everybody was very cautious. Now, the secret to actually completing the course with the least amount of bodily injury was to pick out one voice that you trusted and to zero in on that voice and allow them to guide you through the maze to get you to the finish line. I think it's pretty easy to see how that game is a lot like life. In our world today, there are many competing voices vying for our attention, telling us where to go, telling us what to do, what clothes to wear, what things to buy. So we need to make sure that the voice that we're listening to is someone that we can trust. We need to have a guide who's been there before us. Now we have this perfectly good reason to be cautious, because the reality is that we're all blind. I mean, completely blind to the future. We have absolutely no vision beyond this precise present moment. I mean, I cannot tell you with absolute certainty that I'm going to live long enough to finish this sermon any more than you can tell me that you're going to stay awake. I mean, that you'll still be alive when I finish this sermon. But I hope that we all will. Here's the point. Absolute, total, complete, opaque blindness to the future is a condition we all share in common. Every one of us. I mean, the wealthy are just as blind as the poor. The educated are as sightless as the uneducated. The famous know as little about the future as the completely unknown person does. None of us know how our children will turn out. None of us know the day that God has appointed for us to die. No one knows whom he or she will marry before they say, I do, or even if marriage lies before him or her. We are universally, absolutely, and unalterably blind. We're like that blindfolded teenager on a trust walk, groping through darkness while trying to listen to a familiar voice, but with one vastly huge difference. You see, on a trust walk, we're in a controlled environment. Our surroundings are generally familiar to us, and for the most part, generally friendly, although we tend to have a little fun at each other's expense. But in the world, our surroundings can be hostile and even fatal. The worst fear for a teenager on a trust walk is a bruised shin or a stubbed toe. But our worst fears are much more menacing. Things like cancer, divorce, loneliness, death. And try as we might to walk as straight as we can, chances are our toe is going to get stubbed along the way, and we're going to get hurt. There's a man in the New Testament who understood this. His name is Jairus. He's the epitome of a man who has tried to walk as straight as he could. But his path has taken a sudden turn into a cave, a very dark cave, and he doesn't want to enter that cave alone. Turn to Mark's Gospel, the 5th chapter, beginning at verse 21 if you have your Bibles with you. Or your smartphone.
Mark or Matthew?
Mark. Does that say Matthew? I want Mark. Pretty sure on this. Better double check. I've got Mark written down. Anyway, so I'm going to double check it. I'll just make sure. So anyway, this is out of the New Century Version, which I really like this translation. All right. Yes, Mark. I've got it right here, just not up there. It's probably my fault. I probably told her wrong on the note. Verse 21. When Jesus went in the boat back to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him there. And a leader of the synagogue named Jairus, by the way, there's a couple different pronunciations of that name. I like Jairus. He came there, saw Jesus, and fell at his feet. He begged Jesus, saying again and again, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and will live." So Jesus went with him. Okay, from these few verses, what have we learned about Jairus so far?
He's a father.
He's a father? What's that?
Leader.
He's a leader in the synagogue?
Yes,
Great faith.
He has great faith? I mean, you're missing an obvious one.
daughter.
What?
Yes, daughter.
Yes, well, yeah, he has a daughter. She's dying. She's dying. Okay, I want to focus just for a moment on the fact that he's a synagogue leader. We're told that about him in the text. Now, that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you and me. But in the days of Christ, the leader of the synagogue was the most important man in the community. The synagogue was more than just the center of religious studies. I mean, it was the center of education as a whole. It was the center of leadership, of societal activity. Their entire culture revolved around what transpired and took place at the synagogue. Fortunately, I guess for me, that was kind of my experience growing up. I grew up attending a church that was 18 miles from the nearest town. I mean, out in the middle of the country. But that church was so central to our community that we were referred in the local town where we went to school as the Pleasant Prairie Community, which was the name of our church, the Pleasant Prairie Church of God. I mean, our entire community was identified with that church. All of our activities, our social activities, centered in that church. It was like the hub that kind of drew and kept our community together. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about what's transpiring here. I mean, Jairus had it all. As the leader of the synagogue, he had job security. He had the guaranteed welcome at the coffee shop, if they had that. He had a pension plan, golf every Thursday with all the leaders of the town. And, you know, he had that all expense paid trip to the national convention every year. Well, you know, exaggerating just a little. But the point is, who could ask for anything more? He had it all. Respect. He was revered in the community. He was looked up to. And yet he does ask for more. He has to ask for more. In fact, he would gladly trade everything, his position, his authority, his respect. He would have traded everything to guarantee the survival of his daughter. You see, the Jairus we see in this story, in these few verses, is not the clear-sighted, black-frocked, nicely groomed civic leader. Instead, we see a blind man begging for a gift. He falls at the feet of Jesus. Now, let that sink in for just a moment. He is looked up to in the community. He's the person highly esteemed, the civic leader, kind of like the mayor. And yet he humbles himself. He subjugates himself at the feet of Jesus. He begs. He pleads. Over and over and over again. Jesus, please, please, come. Kill my daughter. She's dying. He doesn't barter with Jesus. Hey, look, you do me a favor, I'll make sure you're taken care of for life. He doesn't try to negotiate with Jesus. Yeah, hey, I hear that things are getting kind of rough for you in Jerusalem. Those guys are giving you some flack. I'll tell you what, you help me out with this problem, I'll make a few phone calls. Get things taken care of. He doesn't make excuses. Well, normally I'm just not this desperate, but you know, I'd really appreciate it if you would help me out with this little problem I have. No, he pleads. He begs. Save her. You know, there are times in life when everything you have to offer is nothing compared to what you are asking to receive. Jairus is at just such a point. What could a man offer in exchange for the life of his child? So there are no games. There's no haggling. There's no masquerade. The situation is starkly simple. Jairus is blind to the future. But he's recognized in Jesus someone who knows the future. So he asks for his help. And Jesus, who loves the honest heart, goes to give it. And God, who knows what it's like to lose a child, empowers his son. But before Jesus and Jairus get very far, they are interrupted by emissaries from Jairus' house. Verse 35. Sit down a little bit there. Was that an amen? While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of the synagogue leader, and they said, "Your daughter is dead. There's no need to bother the teacher anymore." Try to imagine the emotion Jairus is feeling at that moment. A few moments earlier, he's begging Jesus to come and heal his daughter. Jesus agrees to go. But before they get there, word reaches them that his daughter is dying. End of story, right? Hang on to your seat. Because here's where the ride gets pretty exciting. Jesus goes from being led to the one doing the leading. Jesus goes from being convinced by Jairus to convincing Jairus. Jesus goes from being admired by the people to being laughed at by the people. Jesus goes from helping the people to casting out the people. Because here's where Jesus takes control. Verse 36, but Jesus paid no attention to what they said. I love that verse. It describes the critical principle for seeing the unseen. Ignore what people say. Block them out. Turn them off. Close your ears, and if you have to, just walk away. Ignore the ones who say it's too late to start over. Disregard those who say you'll never amount to anything. Turn a deaf ear toward those who say that you are not smart enough, that you are not fast enough, you are not tall enough, you are not big enough. Just ignore them. Faith sometimes begins by stuffing your ears with cotton. Jesus turns immediately to Jairus and pleads in verse 36, don't be afraid. Just believe. You know, that command of not being afraid or don't fear, that's the command that appears more often in Scripture than any other command. In virtually every book of the Bible, you'll find those words. Don't be afraid. He compels Jairus to see the unseen. And when he says just believe, he's imploring, don't limit your possibilities to the visible. Don't listen only for the audible. Don't be controlled by the logical spot. Believe. Because there is more to life than what meets the eyes. Trust me, Jesus is pleading. Don't be afraid. Just trust and believe. I read a story recently about this father in the Bahamas. We have a nephew-in-law from the Bahamas that my niece married. This father cried out with a similar plea to his young son who was trapped in a burning house. Their two-story home was engulfed in flames, and the family had escaped, the father, the mother, several of the children, and they were on their way out when the smallest boy, the smallest son, the youngest son, became terrified and ran back up the stairs to his bedroom. He went to the window, and his father called up to him from below as the house is in flames and hollers to his young son, "Jump! I'll catch you!" The boy cried out, "But Daddy, I can't see you." "I know," his father called, "but I can see you." You see, the father could see even though the son could not. A similar example of faith was found on the wall of a concentration camp. On it, a prisoner had carved these words, "I believe in the sun, even though it doesn't shine. I believe in love, even when it isn't shown. I believe in God, even when He doesn't speak." Just try to imagine the kind of person who would have scratched those words into the wall. Now I can almost imagine almost a skeletal hand. You've probably seen images of concentration camps when they were liberated after World War II. Imagine that skeletal hand with a broken piece of glass or a sharp bit of stone carving each letter. What hand could have had such a conviction? What eyes could have still seen good in the midst of such horror? There's only one answer. Eyes that choose to see the unseen. As Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:18, we set our eyes not on what we see, but on what we cannot see. For what we see only lasts for a short time, but what we cannot see will last forever. You see, Jesus is asking Jairus to see the unseen, to make a choice either to live by the facts or to see by faith. When tragedy strikes, we too are left to choose what we see. We can either choose to see the hurt or the healing. The choice is ours. Jairus made his choice. He opted for faith in Jesus. And faith in Jesus led him to his daughter. So when they get to the house, Jesus and Jairus encounter a group of mourners. It didn't take them long to get there. They sometimes hired mourners, if you will. He's troubled by their wailing, Jesus says. It bothers him that they express such anxiety over death. In verse 39, Jesus says, "Why are you crying and making so much noise? For the child is not dead, only asleep." It's not a rhetorical question. It's an honest one. Because from his perspective, this girl is not dead, but only asleep. From God's viewpoint, death is not permanent. It's a necessary step for passing from this world to the next. So it's not an end, it's literally a beginning. You know, as a young boy, growing up on the farm, being the youngest of three, I tended to get to stay home a little more, so a lot of my summer days were just spent outside playing in the dirt. We had Tonkin road graders and payloaders and dump trucks. I mean, it was just fun to play in the dirt. But whenever Mom would call us in for supper, by the way, it's supper up there, just clarifying, she had one simple rule. We had to get cleaned up. Because dirty, sweaty boys couldn't eat at the table. So her words were always, get cleaned up, change your clothes before you come to the table to eat. Now, I don't know too many boys, when they're young, playing out in the dirt that are too fond of bathing and getting dressed. But I never once complained and defied my mother by saying, I'd just rather stink than eat tonight. Because as much as I love to play in the dirt, I also love to eat. So in my economy, a bath and a clean shirt were a small price to pay for a good meal. And from God's perspective, death is a small price to pay for the privilege of sitting at His table. Flesh and blood cannot have a part in the kingdom of God. This body that can be destroyed must clothe itself with something that can never be destroyed. And this body that dies must clothe itself with something that can never die. That's 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 and 53. God is even more insistent than my mother was. Because in order to sit at His table in heaven, a change of clothing must occur, and we must die in order for our body to be exchanged for a new one. So from God's viewpoint, death is not something to be dreaded or feared, but it's to be welcomed. And when He sees people crying and mourning over death, He wants to know, why are you crying? When we see death, we usually see disaster. When Jesus sees death, He sees deliverance. Now, that's a new thought to these people. And they can't wrap their minds around it. It's too much for them to take. And their response is one of laughter and ridicule. Are you kidding me? So the next time people mock you, just remember they mocked Jesus too. But look closely at what happens next. Because you won't believe what Jesus does. He throws them out of the house. That's what the text says. After throwing them out of the house. He doesn't just politely ask them, would you guys mind quieting down? And please just quietly exit the premises. His response is decisive and strong. It's as though he picks them up by the back of the collar and belt loop and literally tosses them out of the house. Some of you are probably saying, oh, he wouldn't do something like that. But guess what? In the original text, the word used here is the same word used to describe what Jesus did to the money changers in the temple. On that occasion, he got together some strips of leather, braided a whip, and began driving them out. That doesn't mention that in the text this time, but the imagery is the same. And it's also the same verb that is used 38 times to describe what Jesus did to the demons. He threw them out of there. You have no place here. Get out. Why such force? Why such intolerance for these people who supposedly are just there to offer support and comfort? I think the answer can be found by going back to that illustration of the trust walk with the young people. God's not going to let the noise of all those voices distract you from placing your faith in Him. He's still busy casting out the critics and silencing the voices that could deter you from trusting in Him with your life. Some of His work you might have seen. Most of it you don't. Only when you get to heaven will you know how many times He has protected you from deceitful voices, from luring voices that would take you astray. And only heaven will show you the times that He has protected you by giving you a mate who loves God more than you do, by opening the door for a new business so that you could attend the same church, by having the right voice from the right message on the right radio station the day that you needed His encouragement. Mark this down. God knows that you and I are blind. He knows that living by faith and not by sight doesn't come naturally to us. And I think that's one reason why He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Not for her sake. I mean, she was better off in heaven after all. But for our sake. To teach us that heaven sees when we place our trust in Jesus.